will be serving some snacks after the event. And finally, and probably most importantly, the book is available for sale at a very special price tonight, 150 Rand. And it's quite a nice discount on the normal price. But let me introduce the guest speaker, Mark Heywood. I mean, I'm sure most of you know him in his very little introduction as the Executive Director of Section 27. And Mark has quite an extensive activist history, first in politics, and later in the AIDS environment as one of the founders of the Treatment Action Campaign in 1997. He joined the Law AIDS Project in 1994 and became its Executive Director in 2006. He's chairperson, or was chairperson, of the South African National AIDS Council. He's also the current chairperson of the UN AIDS Reference Group on HIV/AIDS and Human Rights. And in 2009, he was appointed as a member of the Ministerial Advisory Committee on National Health Insurance. So we're really pleased to have Mark here. I'm sure he'll be a very good discussing with Nicoli on the topic. But I would like to just highlight that Mark also has another great area of interest, and that is in literary studies. He actually did his master's in English literature on the influences of Shakespeare on African writing and politics in South Africa. So some of you may know this already. But I'm bringing it up here because we always give a gift to our speakers. And we've just published a new book called Shakespeare and the Coconuts, Personal Art and South African Culture. So Mark, thanks for coming, and here's a gift for you.
Good evening, everybody. And thank you for coming this evening. It's my job to welcome Nicoli, who is the author of the book that we're going to talk about tonight, and several other books that I mentioned, but it's in particular to talk about this book called The AIDS Conspiracy. But before we get going, talking to Nicoli, I'd also just like to say that I think it's quite a special evening and quite a special environment to have this discussion, because the context of the discussion about Nicoli's book is an audience, many people of whom have been absolutely central to the struggle against AIDS denialism and to the eventual defeat of AIDS denialism in South Africa and the ushering in of a rational policy on HIV. So I'd particularly like to acknowledge my former boss of the AIDS Law Project, Justice Edwin Cameron, who everybody knows has played a heroic it was Edwin who deflected me from Shakespeare and A.C. Jordan into AIDS. And also to acknowledge leaders of the Treatment Action Campaign who are here with us tonight, in particular the chairperson of the Treatment Action Campaign, Nonkosi Kumala. But it's not just about leaders, it's perhaps one of the things I want to bring up in this conversation is that the fight against AIDS denialism is sometimes overlooked. It's been very much about the ordinary people in communities worst affected by HIV who stood up, wore HIV positive t-shirts, learned the science that Nicoli is going to talk about HIV, and confronted the government that was hell-bent on denying people access to treatment. So I would like to acknowledge, I can't do it by name, but the hundreds of members of the Treatment Action Campaign who have come to join us here this evening. So thank you very much for coming. So we're going to have a conversation, really, and to start with a conversation between Nicoli and myself, but it won't end with just the two of us, because we'd like to hear your thoughts and your questions about this book and about the topic generally. We'll probably keep this going until about 7 o'clock, for as long as I judge that you're not fading and your interest is not fading. So, Nicoli, first of all, congratulations. This is your second book that deals with the question of AIDS denialism in South Africa. The first book, which again I also highly recommend, is a book called Mortal Combat, AIDS Denialism and the Struggle for Antiretrovirals in South Africa. It documents in many ways the struggle of TAG, the struggle of other players. It's also part of what I sense is a growing body of scholarship on this tragic phenomenon that affected our society for a decade. On Monday, you will be talking to Cape Town about a book with Nathan Geffen, who has also published a book that's worth reading called Debunking Delusions. Also talks about TAG and about AIDS denialism, its roots and its origins. Now, I guess what I'd like you to do first of all, Nicoli, is just talk a little bit about the AIDS conspiracy and tell us what's in it, what you deal with, because most of us haven't read it. I fortunately have read it, but most people here won't have read it. But also, why was it necessary to write another book about AIDS denialism? I mean, you've done one. Aren't you flogging a dead horse? Why do you need to do two? So can you just, 5-10 minutes, introduce us to what you are talking about? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Well, yeah, this is my second and last book, definitely on this topic. But I think that there's a lot more still to be said about the nature of ideas. So I agree with Mark that the story of the South African struggle has been told really well, particularly by Nathan Geffen. But what prompted me to write this next book was really to think a bit more about what is it about ideas like AIDS denialism and also AIDS conspiracy theories in general. But AIDS denialism is one set of conspiracy theory. It says, we actually don't believe it exists, or if it exists, it's harmless. How's that a conspiracy theory? Well, it's a conspiracy theory against science. It's basically saying all the scientists and all the evidence is wrong. They're in cahoots with the pharmaceutical industry, perhaps the CIA, evil governments. Right? We can't trust the whole of science. So in that sense, it's a conspiracy theory which says a small group of people claim to know the truth and the whole of science is wrong. So people who believe that HIV in America, people in America who believe that HIV is manufactured by the CIA and possibly through vaccinations, right? Those stories are just as much a conspiracy theory as our own stories, our own AIDS denial stories that we know under Becky. Right? And both of them have the same consequence. They both say, don't trust the scientists, don't trust the science, in fact ignore them. And people then don't take precautions and they don't take treatment. Now there's a lot of studies in the United States showing that if you believe these conspiracy theories in the United States, you're less likely to use condoms and you're less likely to take treatment. So one of the things that prompted me to write this book was we did a big survey in Cape Town of young people. And we asked them all sorts of questions about their sexual behavior and their beliefs and their living circumstances. And we found that when you tried to figure out what was it that made one set of people use a condom the last time they had sex and another set of people not, we found that it was influenced by how long you were in a relationship, right? But all sorts of relationship dynamics, but also what you believed about HIV and about its cause. So if you believe that HIV was invented by the CIA, those sorts of ideas, not denialist ideas, those conspiracy ideas, you were more likely to practice unsafe sex. But what also interested me about the survey was we found that if you'd heard of the treatment action campaign, not if you were a member, you just heard of it, right? And take into account whether you read newspapers and listen to the radio. But if you'd actually just heard of it, you were much more likely to use condoms, and you were less likely to be exposed to it. So be attacked. So then I began to think, well, what's the role of leaders in promoting these ideas? These ideas don't come out of nowhere. There's good reasons why you might believe these ideas. In my book, I talk about the good reasons why people might be suspicious of government involvement, and there's plenty of good reasons, both in America and South Africa. Governments have not been, they've been quite secretive with their biological warfare programs, right? But why in South Africa and in the United States do some people that they are more likely to believe these things, and I target leaders. And I show that in South Africa, leadership from TAC was really good, leadership from Manta and Thabo was really bad, whereas in the United States, bad leadership from community leaders was bad. Right? Leadership from community leaders were bad. So there were a lot of AIDS conspiracy theorists coming out of the community in America. So this is a slightly different question. So this book really looks at America and South Africa on those two things. And then finally, where does the AIDS denialism come into all of this? Well, they make a conspiratorial move against science. And they have their hero scientists, they have their praise-singing journalists, and they have their alternative healers. And you find the same thing in America. People who promote AIDS conspiracy beliefs or AIDS denialist beliefs are linked to a community which has its own leaders. So you always find, right, that these ideas are promoted by people who say, don't trust the science. They're all in a conspiracy. Don't believe a word. And guess what? I can make you healthy with my vitamins, like antiretroviral in this country. I've got some alternative way of keeping you free of HIV or even curing it. So I think that there's an element actually of what I call cultural alerts. These alternative healers, these quacks, if you like, who are linked closely to those people who make a conspiratorial move against science. And in this sense, my book is a further development on some of the themes that Nathan raises in his book.
Thanks, Nicoli. Is the book over? I mean, the AIDS conspiracy, is the AIDS conspiracy over? Where does the book finish? Do you think that AIDS denialism is dead, or is there going to have to be volume 3 in a year or two's time?
I think the useful thing about looking at America and South Africa and looking at different beliefs, not just denialist beliefs, but also these conspiracy theories, that when you do that, you realize how powerful these ideas are rooted in society. So I don't think it's over. I think these ideas keep replicating, and you've got to keep struggling against them. And so a big theme of this book is how do we struggle against them? In South Africa, it was a political struggle. It was a political struggle against it lately, and it was a struggle on the ground for treatment literacy. In America, the struggle is much more for credibility of your voice. For the people who want to promote science and precautions against HIV and good treatments in America are having to make an argument against conspiracy theories where they say, I am an acceptable voice, a credible voice. So I talk about, for example, a prisoner in America who's linked to the Black Panthers and all sorts of left-wing activity, who's been the most successful fighter against AIDS conspiracy theories. So I can talk about that later. But there's also the scientists. What have they done to try and block these conspiracy theories and counter them? I talk about that also. And then the everyday people who are on the internet. For example, Nathan and Edward River, they had Crackdown and AIDStruth.org. Right? All of these websites are also fighting on the support to support science. So the book's about that. How do you fight back? That's the subtitle, Science Fights Back.
Right. The thesis cubes ask you what contradicts in a certain sense the whole theme of your book. I mean, the book's called The AIDS Conspiracy, Science Fights Back. What would you say if I said to you, well, actually, scientists didn't fight back? In fact, scientists were very timid for probably the first 5 or 6 years of the AIDS conspiracy in South Africa. And in fact, scientists only really came in the wake of groups like the Treatment Action Campaign, after the Treatment Action Campaign has been viewed as a group of crazy, toy-toying, noisy people making a fuss about nothing. I mean, what do you think the scientific community of South Africa played a heroic or a slightly timid role? And what conclusions, what would you say to a university like this, to the honourable professors and medics and clinicians and so on, about their role in social policy around health? Sorry.
that is a difficult one. Because, I mean, if you look at the AIDS struggle in South Africa, there were some very heroic scientists, right, and doctors. Francois Venter, for example, the HIV clinicians. There's Slim Karim as well from Natal. I mean, there's a whole range of people who were quite openly critical of the media. But I think they were relatively timid, and it probably was tech that created the space for them to move and contest that more widely. I'm not really answering your question. I mean, what else have they done?